Broadcasting Network. We're located at www.cubnlive.com. I'll be your host today. My name is Troy. What do we have in the news today? Today we got no scientific evidence that people are born gay or transgender, Johns Hopkins researchers say. Revealers observing minutes of silence in memory of the victims of the post-gay nightclub shooting in Orlando, Florida, during a gay pride parade in the southern city of Ashdod, Israel, June 17, 2016. Distinguished scholars at Johns Hopkins University in Maryland released a new 143-page report on Monday that argues that there is not enough definitive scientific evidence available to suggest that gay, lesbian, and transgender individuals are born with a certain sexual orientation or gender identity. In the three-part report published by the New Atlantis, Lawrence Mayer, a scholar in residence at Johns Hopkins University's psychiatry department and a professor of statistics and biostatistics at Arizona State University, and Paul McHugh, a professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at Johns Hopkins, take on prevailing claims that sexual orientation and gender dysphoria are caused by natural traits. Additionally, the scholars challenge the claim that discrimination and social stigma is the sole reason why those with same-sex attractions or gender identity suffer high rates of mental health problems. In the first part, the report argues that there is insufficient evidence to claim that the heterosexual, homosexual, or bisexual attractions are an innate trait that people are born with. The report goes into detail about past epidemiological studies that have found a modest association between genetic factors and sexual orientation and behaviors. However, the report states that such studies have not been able to provide significant evidence pointing to particular genes. The report also looks at other evidence of hypothesized biological causes, such as parental development and hormones, but finds that evidence is also limited. Studies of the brains of homosexuals and heterosexuals have found some differences, but have not demonstrated that these differences are inborn rather than the result of environmental factors that influenced both psychological, and neurobiological traits. The report reads, one environmental factor that appears to be correlated with non-heterosexuals sexuality is childhood sexual abuse victimization, which may also contribute to the higher rates. You see, it's always happened when the kids are being raised under certain circumstances. That's why they become what they become. It's not something you're born with. Come on. There is actually some evidence that suggests sexual orientation is fluid. You watch it on TV, you read it in books, it gets in your head, then you think to yourself, I'd rather be a girl, or I'd rather be a boy, because it's alright with them, it'll be alright with me. A participant takes part in an annual Pride London parade, which highlights issues of the gay, lesbian, and transgender community in London, Britain, June 25th, 2016. A study by the National Longitudinal Study of Adolescent to Adult Health tracked the sexual orientation of children ages 7 to 12 in 1994 to 1995, and again in 2007 and 2008 when they were young adults. The study found that 80% of male respondents who had reported same-sex attractions and both sex attractions in their childhood later identified as exclusively heterosexual. Meanwhile, more than half of the family's respondents who reported both sex attractions as children reported being exclusively attracted to males as adults. The idea there that sexual orientation is fluid, that people change as people grow, Mayer told the Christian's Post in an interview last Friday. There are probably some people that identify as heterosexual that then later on identified as homosexual. So it goes both ways. The importance there is the fluidity and flexibility that these things change in time. The report also analyzed studies that focus on concordance rates in twins. One study the scholars looked at was a 2010 study from psychiatric epidemiologist Nicholas Langstrom and his colleagues that analyzed 3,826 identical and fraternal same-sex twin pairs. In analyzing twins, parents were at least one of the twins was same-sex attracted. The report found that only in a fraction of the cases resulted in both twins being same-sex attracted. There was a concordance rate of 18% of identical twin males, 11% for fraternal twin males, 22% for identical twin females, and 70% for fraternal twin females. Summarizing the studies of twins, we can say that there is no reliable scientific evidence that sexual orientation is determined by a person's genes. But there is evidence that genes play a role in influencing sexual orientation. The report explains. So the questions are: gay people born that way? Are they born gay? Requires clarification. There is virtually no evidence that anyone, gay or straight, is born that way. If that means their sexual orientation was genetically determined, But there is some evidence from the twin studies that certain genetic profiles probably increase the likelihood the person later identifies as gay or engages in same-sex sexual behavior. You can see the studies are just studies. Try to find out if the kids turn into a female, wanna be a male, or a male wanna be a female. The University of California, Irvine installed a gender-neutral bathroom aimed at the growing issue concerning the liberties of transgender students in U.S. schools. In the third part of the report, the scholars analyzed a number of studies that attempt to show the links between transgender identity and neurological differences. Although some studies have found that brain activation patterns differ among people who identify as members of the opposite biological sex, the scholars hold that these studies do not offer sufficient evidence for drawing sound conclusions about possible associations between brain activation and sexual identity or arousal. The results are conflicting and confusing. Not telling me that much. I'm confused by just reading this thing. The questions is not simple whether there are differences between the brains and the transgender individuals and people identifying with the gender corresponding to their biological sex, but whether gender identity is a fixed, innate, and biological trait, even when it does not correspond to biological sex, or whether environmental or psychological causes contribute to the development of a sense of gender identity in such cases. The report asserts neurological differences in transgender adults might be the consequence of biological factors such as genes or parental hormone exposure, or of psychological and environmental factors such as childhood abuse, or they could result from some combination of the two. There are no serial longitudinal, whatever that word is, or prospective studies looking at the brains of cross-gender identified children who develop to later identify as transgender adults. The report continues. Lack of this research severely limits our abilities to understand causal relationships between brain morphology, or functional activity, and the later development of gender identity different from biological sex. Additionally, the report took issues with the conditioning of children to believe that they need to block their puberty or get a sex reassessment in order to avoid mental health issues. What? The report cites the 5th edition of American Psychiatric Association Diagnostics and Statistical Manual, that was a good one, of mental disorders to show that the persistence of gender dysphoria in children does not often persist into adulthood. Innatal biological males persistence of gender dysphoria has ranged from 2.2 to 30%, the report explains. In natal females, persistence has ranged from 12 to 50%. Scientific data on persistence of gender dysphoria remains sparse due to the very low prevalence of the disorder in the general population, but the wide range of findings in the literature suggests that there is still much that we do not know about why gender dysphoria persists or desists in children. The Christian Post asked Mayer what his response will be to criticism received from the left and from conservative who might disagree with certain aspects of his report. As Mayer's co-author Paul McHugh has spoken out in the past with remarks that some might consider inflammatory on the subject of gender identity and sexual reassessment surgeries, Mayer suspects that critics will claim the report was only issued to serve McHugh basis. That isn't true, Mayer said. Every line in this I've either wrote or approved of. There is no bias either way. The bias is just towards science. I think we get into this very high volume battles particularly in this current environment, may continue. When science supports our position, sometimes it is better to tone down a bit. In other words, conservatives have been highly critical of the report too already because it didn't support this or didn't support that. The idea is that let the science speak and then see how they respond to it. Amen to that. No scientific evidence that people are born gay or transgender. Johns Hopkins researchers say. So you see, people, scientifically, they really can't find a reason why the women become boys and boys become women. It's all about watching TV and learning and getting abused as a child. Now for me, I think of it as you are what you are. You be who you be. You follow whatever path you want to follow. Read your Bible, you grow and grow every day. You know, you will know what's right and what's wrong. As growing up as a child, if you do not know what's right and what's wrong, then you tend to go the other route, the other path, the dark side. You don't know what's going on. You can't get faulted for that because you was not shown the path. So this is to everybody out there that don't like gays or transgenders. Love them as your own because they're very lovable people. And you can get to know them and they're very happy and we all one big happy family. They just don't know the path. You need to show them the path. So as Christians, you need to do that. Show them the path. Jesus.